Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us tonight for our introductory webinar to iNaturalist. We're excited to have you here, and we're excited to talk about iNaturalist and the ways that you can get involved in the TTF watershed, as well as the rest of the other areas that you live as well. So I am Ryan. I am the upstream conservation leader at Toccony Frankfurt Watershed Partnership. So we are a small environmental nonprofit based out of the Frankfurt section of Philly. We work in both Montgomery County and Philadelphia as well. So I work in Montgomery County, and some of the stuff that I focus on is managing our environmental restoration projects. I also do some water quality monitoring, and then a lot of community outreach and community programs and working with schools and whatnot as well. So part of the work that we do, we are part of the Delaware River Watershed Initiative, which is funded through the William Penn Foundation, and it sort of brings us together with a lot of great partners. So two of our partners are joining us tonight. So they are the folks from Wissahickon Trails and also the Pennypack Ecological Restoration Trust as well. So this partnership started back in 2014, and it's been really sort of valuable for us because it helps us in having extra people who can help us with monitoring and other issues, as well as we do joint workshops as well. And we all have a citizen science program as well. So it's been a great sort of initiative for collaboration that we've taken a lot away from as well. So what we do at TTF is that we focus on stewardship, education, restoration, and advocacy. So we do all of this work basically to help improve the water quality of our creeks and educate people on that. So I just have a couple pictures here to show our work. So up here on the top right, we have our environmental educator, Dallas, who's out in Toccony Creek Park, which is the park that we focus a lot of our work on in the city. And he's out with the Creekmobile educating kids on water pollution in the creek and whatnot. So then the picture we have here at the bottom right of the screen, that is students from Arcadia University working at one of our riparian buffers at the Abington Junior High School to clean up invasives. So that's sort of the stewardship component. We work with different community groups, and we also work as a staff to help manage the restoration work that we do. So a picture here in the middle at the bottom is a picture of some of the restoration work that we do. So that is a bioswale at Ablethorpe Park. And so what a bioswale is it's sort of an area where maybe the harder clay soils are excavated, and then a berm is created on one side, and water flows through it, and it passes through the native plants and whatnot, and it conveys the water, slows down the velocity and flow, and also helps to filter it a little bit as well. And sort of the last component of our work you can see here at the bottom left of the screen is sort of advocacy and also outreach. So this is a picture from several years ago at one of our first projects, actually the first project along in Jenkintown Creek. That's at Abington Friends School. And so you can see in this picture our executive director, Julie, as well as State Representative Brendan Boyle, and also students from the Abington Friends School where the project went in as well. So here's just a map of some of our work that we've done in Montgomery County. So Montgomery County, a lot of the focus is on restoration work, and we focus on restoration in Montgomery County because, as you can see from the map here, we have a lot of smaller headwater creeks. So all of the stars here represent different projects that we have in Montgomery County. And so the restoration work that we do varies. So we've done projects that are things such as restoring wetlands, but also planting native buffers along the creek, as well as things like rain gardens and bioswales, like I had mentioned before as well. So one of the things you'll notice in the difference between the watershed in Montgomery County and Philadelphia is in Philadelphia, there's not any of the tributary creeks and the smaller creeks. So they were all piped and covered over as the city developed. So that sort of affects some of the work that we do. So in Philadelphia, our focus isn't quite on the environmental restoration side as much. It's more on the education and advocacy side. And we focus on getting people into Toccony Creek Park. So Toccony Creek Park is the park in the city. It has over 3 miles of walking trails, and Toccony Creek flows through it. And we really focus a lot on trying to get people into the park to learn about nature, to enjoy nature, and then also learn about watershed issues as well. So this picture you'll see here on the bottom right is a picture of one of the gateways to the park. There's 10 different gateways that people can access, and we're constantly having different events and programs at the gateways to get people out into the park then. So now that I've just went over a little bit about what we do at TTF, now I'm going to jump into some of the stuff about iNaturalist. So I'm just going to go through a brief overview here of what we're going to cover tonight. So the first thing we're going to cover basically is just the basics of what is iNaturalist. Then we're going to talk about iNaturalist and how TTF uses it, as well as our partners at the Pennypack and Wissahickon as well. And then we're going to talk about recording good observations, how you would upload those observations, then how you would identify other people's observations. And then also we're going to talk about some upcoming iNaturalist events that we have that you can get involved in as well. So what is iNaturalist? So iNaturalist is an app from the California Academy of Natural Sciences and another partner, in which basically it's an app you can take a picture and submit something to the app, and then people will go and ID it for you. There's a predictive feature on the app that also helps you identify stuff as well. So it's sort of a little bit like Facebook, where you can submit a picture and then people can comment on the picture, or people can help you ID it and agree on identifications. So the community itself is pretty diverse. So it's like everyday people who are trying to learn different identifications, to like school teachers and whatnot, all the way up to PhD level scientists who are out and IDing stuff for people as well. So it's a really good way if you're looking to learn some new stuff, learn about different plants, or just learn different birds. So I've been using it a lot I've been submitting different pictures of birds that I've been out seeing, and it's been a big help in learning some of the different birds. So iNaturalist itself, there's a desktop version and there's also an app. So the desktop version is a little more expanded, but it's easier to sort of upload observations from the app on your phone as well. So here I just have a screenshot from the actual desktop version. So if you go to iNaturalist.org, there's a lot of great resources there where it can give you more information that I might not cover tonight, or you might have other questions about things. So feel free to go there. So if you log on to iNaturalist.org, and then you go to the More section, and then all the way down to Help, it'll take you to all of these questions here that'll answer various questions that you might have. So one of the other great things it has too is there's a teacher's guide there. So it's a lot of great resources for teachers if you want to get involved with your class in doing iNaturalist and learning IDs with them. It talks about like curriculum and other things that you can use in the classroom as well. And so one of the other great things that the website has as well as some different video tutorials. So I'm going to show 2 different video tutorials tonight, but you can see there's a handful more there. They're pretty good. So we're going to show one on making observations from your phone tonight, and then also taking good pictures. So I think we're actually going to jump into showing them right now before we get started in some more of the presentation.
Okay, so you've installed the iNaturalist app and created an account. Time to get outside and record your first observation. Here's how to do it. Any living thing, like a plant, animal, or fungus, can be an observation on iNaturalist. Once you find something you'd like to record, just tap Observe and take a photo. You can review your picture, then hit Next if it looks good. To identify it, hit What did you see? If you have an internet connection, iNaturalist will suggest 10 visually similar species and often a common ancestor. You can choose one of those or search for a species name. On this observation details screen, you can add more photos of the same organism or write a note. The date, time, and location have been automatically added. You can also change the geoprivacy of the observation, mark whether it's captive or cultivated, or add it to a project. Once you're finished, just hit Share and your observation will be uploaded for everyone to see and identify. That's it. Keep on exploring and sharing.
So now we're just going to take this time sort of to give everyone an option if they'd like to get an account. So you can either get the app on your phone or you can log on to iNaturalist.org and create an account. So what you need to create an account is just an email, and then you do a username and password. One thing to keep in mind too is if you're a teacher who's looking to use it with the classroom sort of, you might want to create a classroom account and then just be the moderator for that and have the kids then post, and then you would just basically keep an eye on their observations then. Another thing too is if you're planning on doing this with your kids, if you have younger kids, the minimum age requirement for having an account is also 13. So if you have younger kids, you might just want to make an account and then have them help you with it as well. So now we're just going to take a little while here if you want to download the app or go online and create the account then. So now that we've had the chance to download the app and or create an account if we'd like, now I'm just going to talk briefly about how we at TTF use iNaturalist and how it benefits us, and then also how it benefits our partners as well. So here's a picture of our project page on iNaturalist. So what that basically is it's just a footprint of our watershed, where if you take an observation that's in the TTF watershed at all, then it'll automatically go to this page. So you can see the title up here. It's the Toconi Frankfurt Watershed Wildlife. And just take note of that then. So you can search that on the app or on the computer, and it'll take you to this page. And how you can use it sort of is, it's great if you wanted to see something like a great blue heron. You've never seen a great blue heron before. You could look on this page and go through the species and find a great blue heron and see where someone observed it. And then you could go out and try and see it yourself. One of the ways that we sort of use it is that it's a great way for community engagement. It gets people involved. So these BioBlitz events that I'm going to talk about later, we get people sort of excited about going into the park, going out to our projects and observing nature. It's a fun way to get outside and get engaged. One of the other ways that we use it sort of is it's a good way to see the species that people are seeing in our watershed. So maybe someone saw a species that we had never seen before, or maybe there was a new species from a neighboring watershed that sort of just came into our watershed as we started to do more restoration work and improve the health of our watershed as a whole. One of the other ways that we sort of use it is a good example of that. Last year we did a BioBlitz in the spring, and Abington Friends School, they participated in it. And we have a rain garden there, as I mentioned earlier, and we also have a section of riparian buffer. So as some of the kids were out, they posted observations of some invasive species at our projects, and then I saw that and it let me know that we needed to sort of go out and tackle some of those invasive species there as well. So how our partners use iNaturalist then, so Wissahickon uses it similar to us sort of. So they have a page here that's set up, so the Wissahickon Valley Watershed Biological Survey. And what that is any observations within the watershed, the Wissahickon watershed, go into that page and you can see them. And they also break it down by location based off of what people see at specific preserves on the Wissahickon property as well. And then for the Pennypack Trust, how they use it is that this previous year here, they have a pair of beavers on the trust property, and so they've been using it as sort of a tool to engage visitors to the trust to help them monitor where the beavers are going. So if they see beaver tracks or beaver chew, any sort of signs of beavers, they want people to submit those observations. So it gives you then the time and sort of the location so they can sort of track where the beavers are going. And they've had pretty good success with that so far. They've had a handful of people who have submitted observations, and it's been a good way for them to track the beavers then on their property as well. So that's sort of a couple different ways how organizations use it. And like I said, it's a good tool for people to use sort of to learn IDs, but also in a lot of cases you can go out and check on projects, check on specific observations, and then try and go out and see those species for yourself as well. So now I'm just going to take this time here for anybody who has any questions. If you have any questions, you can just type them in the chat box, and then we will answer them for you.
So it looks like we have a couple of questions here already. The first question for you, Ryan, is what is the coolest thing you've ever identified using iNaturalist?
So the coolest thing that I think I've seen someone else identify in our watershed specifically was last year at Abington Friends School. After we did the BioBlitz, some of the students in the high school there were actually using the app, and they found a northern red salamander next to the creek. So they're a native salamander that we don't see too much of, but they're really cool. So they're like 5 or 6 inches long, and they're bright red with black spots on them. And it was cool that they had seen that there. I was excited. One time we found a juvenile in the creek, but I haven't found any adults up there. So I was pretty jealous that they found it when I wasn't there.
Very cool. Looks like we have one more question here. So somebody asked, do we have to do anything special to enter the BioBlitz?
So as long as you have a account and you're taking pictures and recording observations in our watershed, which is that footprint map that you had seen there, it'll automatically go into the project page then. So you don't have to do anything special, and that also goes for the BioBlitz too. The only requirement with the BioBlitz, which I'll talk about a little bit later, is it has to be between a set amount of time that you take that observation then.
All right, cool. It looks like that's the last question for now. If folks have more questions, we'll do some more Q&A as we go through.
Okay, so now then we'll jump into sort of some do's and don'ts of recording good observations. So we watched that video before that stressed a couple things for taking good observations. So now I'm just going to go over some things to avoid when taking observations, and then some good practices to also use when taking observations. So one of the things to think about too is, so some of these pictures I'm including in here have been taken with a smartphone, some of them have been taken with a better camera. But you can still get good pictures just with your smartphone. And also, I'm just going to stress one thing. If you can't get a great picture, it's still important to submit the observation. There's some different tools you can use to help people identify it then. But every observation is still a good observation, even if it's not a perfect picture then. So we just have a couple examples here of some sort of things to avoid when taking an observation. And you'll see two pictures here. So both of the pictures, it's sort of hard to see what anyone's supposed to be identifying. So if you look at the picture here on the left, you'll see a smaller black dot in the middle of the frame there. So what that is that's a juvenile channel catfish in the Jenkintown Creek. So it's sort of the thing to avoid with this is taking pictures of species where they're sort of camouflaged or they're really difficult to see in the picture. So the catfish really isn't easy to see. If I hadn't seen it in person, I couldn't tell you it was a catfish, and I couldn't even tell you it was a channel catfish then. So you want to avoid taking pictures where you really sort of, it's like a scavenger hunt to find the species. So in the picture here on the right is a picture of a juvenile two-line salamander in the creek. And so you can see it in the middle of the frame again. It's sort of the longer, dark figure in the middle of the frame. And so that's another sort of challenge to spot that. And also you really can't see any of the identifying characteristics of the salamander. If I hadn't taken a picture and seen it, like I said, it would be difficult to sort of observe it. So some of the ways that you can help people in identifying something if you can't see really any of the identifying characteristics or the picture isn't as good. There's a notes section that we'll talk a little bit about when you're submitting observations, where you could label some specific features that maybe you saw about the species, or also you could even label sort of the location of the species as well. So sometimes the specific location can give people a big clue to what the species might particularly be as well. So another thing to sort of avoid when you're taking an observation and sort of in taking pictures sort of in general is just avoiding blurry pictures. So the picture here on the left, you can pretty easily tell, it's a little blurry, but you can still tell that that's a cardinal. Then the picture on the right here is a little tougher. If you really know your birds, you can tell that that's a Carolina wren, but it's sort of distorted moving and it's a blurry picture again. So for people who really know their birds, they might be able to identify that. But somebody who doesn't quite know their birds as well, it might be difficult to ID that. So blurry pictures can make it hard to see some of the distinguishing features that might tell you that it's this species versus that species. Another important thing to avoid when submitting observations or taking pictures for observations too is that you have good lighting. Bad lighting can make it hard to see any of the features of a specific species. So we have here a picture on the left of what looks like it might be a sparrow, but it's really tough to tell if it is a sparrow or what kind of sparrow it even is, because the lighting is thrown off, so you can't see any really defining characteristics of the species there. So then we have the picture here on the right is a picture of an eastern crayfish caught in the creek. So I've included this photo because when I submitted this observation, someone told me that the picture wasn't good and they couldn't ID it. So it's tough to sort of ID this species, mainly because the lighting is sort of off and you can't see any of the defining characters again that make it an eastern crayfish. It sort of blends in a little bit, but the lighting makes it look a lot darker than it actually was. Two other things to avoid when we're taking observations are to sort of avoid like taking scenery pictures. So you'll see here between the picture on the left and the picture on the right, there's no real focus to the picture. There's no particular species that jumps out to people that they should identify. So the picture on the left here is a picture from our bioswale over at Avalthorpe that we showed earlier when we had first planted it. This is it about a year later when it's more grown up. So we have a couple different species in the forefront of this picture. So in the very front, we have some iris, and then the red flowers there are also cardinal flower. But looking at that picture, if you posted that on iNaturalist, I wouldn't know what you wanted ID'd. So people would stray away from IDing that, and the predictive feature might even have trouble identifying something to ID. And then the picture here on the right, we just sort of have a picture of a trail in the woods. So we see a bunch of different trees here. You could individually sort of go in and identify a couple of the trees, but there's no real tree in focus. There's nothing that really signifies you want anything ID'd, so it probably won't get ID'd if you posted that as an observation as well. So other things to avoid, sort of, as I mentioned earlier, being able to clearly see some of the defining characters of a species are pretty important when submitting an observation to iNaturalist, or at least being able to describe that through words in the notes section beneath. So the picture here on the right, you'll see, for people who know their birds, once again, you can sort of tell that that's a northern flicker based off of the red on the back of its head. But that's really not a great picture to post as an observation on iNaturalist because you really can't see a lot of the good defining characteristics of the species, which are on the front, such as its beak or the markings on the front of the bird as well. So in the picture here on the left, one thing to avoid with taking pictures like this is avoid the species in question being distorted by like branches and stuff in the forefront of the picture. So you really can't see much of the bird. And also the bird's upside down, which makes it hard to see. So it's tough to be able to identify the bird from that picture. Had I not seen other pictures, I might not be able to say that that's a yellow-rumped warbler. But you just want to make it good observations are sort of clear and in focus, and the species is in the front of the picture so people can see a lot of the defining characteristics. So in this picture, for example, sort of referring to what I originally talked about, you want to avoid making it sort of a scavenger hunt for people to find the species. So if you look closely in this picture, you can see two wood ducks, a male and a female on the far bank. They sort of blend in with the rocks, so it's initially sort of hard to see them. But the main takeaway from this picture is you want to avoid pictures where the subject is really far away and it's small, it's hard to see, and you really can't see a lot of the defining characters of the species. So that can be tough, especially if you're working with like a smartphone. So this picture I actually took with a camera and it was still far away, so it was still hard to see. But it might be really difficult with a smartphone to get an up-close picture as well. But like I said earlier, it's still important to submit observations, and you can sort of fill in the blanks for some people when they go to ID by including information in the notes section as well. So two of the last things to avoid that we sometimes see a lot of if it's like a school group or some younger participants in iNaturalist too is posting pictures of your pet. So I have here on the picture on the left is a picture of my sister's puppy from a couple years ago. We do see people post pictures of dogs, maybe fish in a fish tank or a snake they have in a tank at home. So iNaturalist is really meant for observations of wild animals. So you want to avoid taking pictures of either things that invade non-native plants that you've planted in your garden or pets you have at home, things that don't quite belong in that area and aren't wild. You want to avoid. iNaturalist is really for wild species that you're observing outside in the wild. And then the picture here on the right is just a selfie. We always get a bunch of people who submit just selfies on the app. So for some of our BioBlitz, the number one observation is people or humans. So like I mentioned with the picture of the pet, it's really meant for wild animals and wild species. We're not wild animals in that sense. So don't include observations of yourself on the app as well. So now we're going to talk about a couple things to keep in mind for taking good observations, and we're going to show some good examples here. So here we have two pictures of the same plant. And so what's good about this is that you have a picture of the flower, then on the other side you have a picture of the buds, the leaves, and then also the branches and stems of the plant as well. So on iNaturalist, when you submit an observation, I had mentioned this earlier, but you can submit more than one picture per observation. So when you're getting observations for plants or trees, shrubs, stuff like that, it can be helpful to submit more than one picture. So like I said, submit a picture of maybe the flower, a leaf from it, the bark, stems, anything that can really help identify it. The more pictures you can submit that show more defining characters, the easier it'll be for people to identify the species then. So then we have two more photos here. So one of the important things to keep in mind here is that both of the subjects, so the New England aster here on the left and the field sparrow on the right, they're both sort of the center of the picture. They're in focus, they're clear, and you can see defining characters. So the picture on the left here of the New England aster, you can see the flower, you can see the buds, you can see the stem, you can sort of see everything and you can easily identify it. And then the picture here on the right of the field sparrow, you can see it's clearly in focus, it's in the center of the picture, you know that's what you want ID'd. And then you can see some of the defining characters like the markings on its head, as well as the pink beak that really give it away as a field sparrow then. So then two other things to keep in mind too is, so we have a picture of a monarch butterfly here on the left on a couple different species of flowers. So there's more than one species in this picture, but this picture is sort of a good example of a good observation because the butterfly is in the forefront of the picture, in front of the other species. It's the focus. It's in the middle of the picture. You can tell that that's what you want identified. And I sort of included this picture. I took this picture on my phone and someone on the app actually commented and said this was a really good picture for ID. And then they told me that it was a female monarch butterfly too. So the picture on the right then is a picture of a northern two-line salamander. So I included this picture basically to just talk about, in the case of like reptiles or amphibians, frogs, turtles, snakes, salamanders, stuff like that, you want to avoid handling them as little as possible. So just take a picture. You don't want to pick them up or mess around with them at all. So you can just lift up the rock or lift up the log and get a picture and then just replace the log to where you found it. Salamanders are sort of a particular concern. They have permeable skin. If you have anything like bug spray or anything on your hands, you could end up killing them when you pick them up to take a picture of them then. So you want to avoid disturbing any species when you're observing them for iNaturalist then. You just want to take pictures and observe from afar. So now we're going to open it up to any questions that anybody might have again.
Looks like we got a couple here in the chat. So the first thing folks want to know is if you take pictures on your camera for the BioBlitz, but you can't upload it until after the date of the BioBlitz, does it still count?
So yes, it will still count. So I was going to touch on this a little bit later. I'll talk a little bit more later about it as well. But as long as the timestamp for the photo is between the allotted time for the BioBlitz, even if you upload it after the BioBlitz ends, it still will show up in the BioBlitz and count towards the number of observations then.
Okay, that kind of brings me to the next question, which is, can we submit older photos of plants and wildlife to iNaturalist?
So you can submit any pictures you've taken from before. If it was in the case of this, it wouldn't count towards our BioBlitz, but it would still go onto our project page there. So that page I showed earlier, the Toconi Frankfurt Wildlife. So it would go into that page and it would still be valuable to us to see the species, and then also people could ID it and help you identify it on there as well. So it doesn't only have to be observations you're taking right now. It could be pictures of older stuff as well.
Okay, and then one of the questions is there a page on iNaturalist where you can view everybody's submissions, everyone's pictures?
Yep. So we're going to talk about that a little bit later too, but there is a section, the Explore section, so you can see it on the app and you can see it on the website as well, where you can sort of go to a map and see all the observations in your area. You can click on the different points and then you can see what people are seeing. You can suggest observations, comment on the pictures, or also if you go on our project page, you can see all the observations that people are taking as well.
Great. There's one last question. Should we avoid taking photos of people's front gardens? Is there a preference if the plants are cultivated or not?
So There is a section here on the app that we're going to talk about where when you submit an observation, there's a button you can check where it says captive or cultivated. So if it's something that someone's planted and you can tell it's planted and it's not wild, then you could still submit it. It's sort of encouraged to not submit things that aren't wild, but you would just check off the captive or cultivated then. So that would be, you can still submit something if you were curious about what kind of plant that is. Maybe you want to plant it around your house. You can still submit it and just list it as captive or cultivated, and someone could still ID it for you and basically tell you what it is then. So it just wouldn't really go towards the scientific body of research then.
All right, great. Looks like that was the last question for now.
Okay, so we will move on now then. So we're going to talk about now, sort of going back to the first video that we had seen talking about submitting an observation on your phone. So we're going to go through submitting an observation on your phone, and then we'll talk a little bit about submitting an observation from a camera and doing it on your desktop, basically. So when you go to submit an observation on your phone, when you open up the app on your phone, you'll see this picture here on the far left is what you'll see when you first open up your phone. It'll have all the observations that you've taken. You'll go down to the button at the bottom that says observe with the little camera, and you'll click on that. And so then you have sort of two options. You can either take the picture live when you're in the field and add it to the app in like real time, or you can take the picture and then upload the stuff later. So that's usually what I do. I'll take pictures when I'm out in the field, and then I'll submit all the stuff later. But you can do either or. And so once you submit the picture, then you'll get taken to this window. And so the first thing you want to do then is go to the what do you see button here. You'll click on that, and it'll open up to this window here on the right. And so what that is it's the sort of predictive feature on iNaturalist. And so what that does is it looks at the picture, it suggests things that are visually similar and also things that I've seen nearby. And it'll also give you what family it thinks it's in. So one thing you can do for iNaturalist, if you're not sure of what this particular species is, you can just key it down to family. So they want you basically to at least input as much data as you can pull from it. So down to the lowest taxonomic level so people can still ID it further for you. If you don't put any identification and you just leave it blank, it'll be a lot less likely for someone to actually ID it for you later then. And so you'll see here, this is a picture of a Carolina wren. And actually the number one suggestion here is a Carolina wren too. So a lot of the time the observation suggestions are right and you can go with them. If you're not sure though, like I said, you can just key it down to the family. But also if you are incorrect, people will give you the correct ID as well in their comments and suggested IDs. So the next field here then is the notes field, which is sort of what I mentioned when we were talking about good observations and if you can't quite get a perfect observation. So this is the section where you can describe maybe the area that you found the species in or describe it in more detail if the picture's not perfect so people have a better idea of what the species actually looked like. So one thing to note too with observations is, I'm talking specifically about pictures here, but you can also submit sounds as an observation too. So like a bird call or a frog call, they can also be submitted as observations. So some of the other details that are included when you submit an observation are the date and time of the photo, which is sort of important. Like when I talked about the BioBlitz, as long as that date's within that window, it'll show up in the BioBlitz then. So then there's the location. So if you have the location settings on your phone, if you take a picture, it'll automatically have the location field populated. If you take the picture on a camera and then upload it to your computer, you'll have to manually enter it. Or if you have the location settings off on your phone, you'll have to manually enter the location as well. So you'll click through on that arrow and it'll take you to a big map and you can pan down to the area where you were observing the species in and you can drop a pin to point to where you found that species then. So the geoprivacy setting is basically just, if you leave it as open, it'll show you the sort of exact location where you found the species. It could also be partial, which will show you the general area, or it could just be completely blocked so then nobody would see where the species is. So one important thing to note is if you submit an observation of a threatened or endangered species, it will show up, it will not give like a specific location for the species from where you found it then. So then the next option we have here is the captive or cultivated, which I mentioned before. If it's not a wild species, if it's something that's planted or it's a pet, you would check off captive or cultivated then. And then the last thing we have before you hit the share button is the projects. So that's similar to the TTF wildlife page that I talked about before, although your observations will automatically get submitted to that. But you can click on this tab and see if there's any projects in the area that you might not automatically get submitted to that you might want to add to as well. So then we just have here what the observation will look like when you post it then. So the picture here on the left and the picture on the right are both from the desktop version. So they give you a little more info on the desktop version than just on the app itself too. But the picture in the middle then is from the app. So I posted this observation of a white-throated sparrow, and I gave the ID of a white-throated sparrow, and then someone agreed with that as well. So we're going to talk a little bit later more about IDing stuff and people IDing your stuff as well. But here's just sort of to show you what shows up on the app and on the desktop. And also on both, it'll show you the map of where you found the observation then as well. So now I'm going to talk briefly about uploading observations on your desktop computer on the internet. So this will be for if you don't have the app on your phone, or if you have like a good camera that you take pictures with, then you can upload them on the computer as well. So go to iNaturalist.org, and then you'll go over to the Your Observations tab. And similar to on the app, it'll take you to a list of all your observations. And so you'll click on the blue button here that says Add Observation. And so that'll take you to this next screen then, where it shows the picture of your observation, and it has all the fields that we populated on the app as well. And so you can submit more than one picture at a time on the desktop version as well. And so similar to what we did before, you'll just click on the species name, then you'll go through the predictive feature and select the species that you think it might be. Then you'll have the date and time, then you'll click on the location, and the next slide here will talk about adding the location, and then you'll go through and you can add the description, which is the same as the notes section, then the captive or cultivated and the projects. So you could fill out all that information, and once all of that information, including the location, is filled in, then you'll just hit add to submit the observations then. So when we go to add the location, so you'll click on that little location button. It'll take you to a big map like this. You can then search the location of where you took the observation. So I took one of these observations at Neshaminy State Park. So I just searched that, and it took me to that. So then I can submit the observation as just the whole park itself, or I can drop a specific pin to, maybe I found it on the creek somewhere. Then I could drop the pin over by the creek so people would know I found it over by the creek then. One thing you can also do, similar to what the app is, you can just pan in from the big extent of the map and just drop a pin down versus just searching to add a location. So now I'm going to open it up to questions again.
All right, it looks like we have one question here. How do scientists use the data collected on iNaturalist? Do you have an example of how a scientist might use that information?
So one thing I'm going to talk about next sort of is when people ID something, it becomes, an observation becomes research grade. So scientists pull like crowdsourced data on here about species populations and species movements all the time. So you can download the data. Anybody who wants to can download the data of all the observed species in a CSV file and work with it. But scientists are like actively use the data to give them like population specific numbers. And maybe this species had never been recorded here before. So scientists will check the app and see if maybe this was the first time we ever saw a cattle egret in Philadelphia. So it could be used for stuff like that as well.
All right, cool. And we have another question. If an observation is taken not in the watershed, what happens to it? Does it count for another watershed?
So it might not count for another watershed. So there's specific, essentially, there's a bunch of different locations that are already on the app, but specifically for like our watershed or some of our neighboring watersheds, you have to add that geographic shapefile into the map to be included. So it'll still go on to the main iNaturalist page, and people can still identify it for you. It just won't go specifically into a watershed project if there's not one there, basically.
Okay, gotcha. It looks like that is all of the questions for now.
Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about some observation details, and then we'll talk about identifying other people's observations. Then we'll just talk about some of the ways that you can get involved with iNaturalist, and then we'll wrap it up with one last question and answer session for anybody. So here we just have from the actual website itself again, a little bit about observation details. So you can see the words research grade in front of you. So when you submit an observation initially, even if you submit the correct observation, it's considered a casual observation. But basically, if one person agrees with your correct observation, then it becomes a research grade observation, which means, as I mentioned, sort of that scientists will use it then and actually use it for various purposes. If you submit the wrong observation and someone corrects it, then one other person needs to agree with that observation to make it research grade. So there's two people that need to agree on an accurate ID for it to be research grade. And one of the common practices that I'll do is if I submit an observation and it's the wrong species and someone corrects it, if enough people agree, I'll go back and agree too. Or if I look at it and I agree, I'll go back and agree too, so it's the right species then. So all the things that go into making an observation research grade are here on the left. So you have the date, the location, there's a photo or a sound, then it has 2 or more supported IDs. And then all of these other things here that are just included as well that'll make it research grade then. So then next we're going to talk a little bit about identifying other people's observations. So as I mentioned before in answering a question, you can view other people's observations by going into like the TTF project page, or you can go to the explore section and zoom in on the map and see other people's observations. So we just have a couple examples of that here. So when you click on an observation, I'll actually backtrack a little bit. When you look at the map of like a specific area, you'll see all of these different colored points here. So all of these different colored points correspond to like a different species. So maybe green is plants and blue is bugs and red is birds. So different stuff like that. So if you click on the point or if you click on an observation on a project page, it'll take you to a window that looks like this. So then you have the picture, you have the location where it's found, all of that information. And then you'll have the person's ID, and then if anybody else suggested an ID, and then where you can either add a comment, maybe you need more information to ID it, or you just want to say like great picture, or you want to give them more information about the species, you can comment there. Or conversely too, on the tab next to that, you can suggest the ID and it'll take you to that predictive feature again, where it'll show you all of the species it could be. If you just type in the species, if you already know it, it'll show up there, and then you just click on that, and then you could suggest that identification as well. And if somebody posted a correct identification, you can just click the agree button and it'll automatically agree for you as well. So now I'm just going to talk about our BioBlitz, which is coming up next week, and then also the City of Nature Challenge, which is coming up and sort of coincides with our BioBlitz as well. So what is a BioBlitz? A BioBlitz is just a period of time where basically we take, in this case, a week to just try and observe as many species as we can in a predetermined geographic area. So that's our watershed here. So you can see the page. You can check it out. You can check out previous year's pages. So this one is the Spring 2020 BioBlitz for Tocconé Frankfurt watershed. And I think the one from last year might have been Spring 2019 BioBlitz Tocconé Frankfurt watershed. We're actually going to look at that page next then. But it's not open right now, so you'll see a countdown. So any observations that happen then from April 20th to April 27th will go into this page. If you submit something on like April 19th, it won't go into the page then. So here is the BioBlitz recap from last year. So last year we had almost 1,300 different species observed in our spring BioBlitz. And I think we had like over 1,300 observations. I think we had about 450 species and we had 80 different observers. So this year we're really hoping to reach 100 observers. So if you guys can participate in the BioBlitz or educate anybody you know, you can show them the recording of this webinar, or you can forward them my information and I can answer any questions for them. We can get them started. We really want to see a lot of participation this year for the BioBlitz, and we want to see up to 1,500 observations would be great this year as well. And so this is what the BioBlitz will look like as it's actually going on. So you'll see the map of where people are recording all the observations. You'll see the leaderboard of who has the most observations, who has observed the most species, and then you'll also see the most commonly observed species during the BioBlitz too. And then you'll see this picture here of all the different species that are being observed. And so you can click on those and you can ID them, you can comment on them, different stuff like that as well that we had already talked about. And so the other sort of initiative that you can be involved in too is the City of Nature Challenge. So what the City of Nature Challenge is it's a global challenge that was started in 2016 that uses iNaturalist, and it's a competition between cities all over the world. Over 100 different cities were involved last year. Last year was the first year that Philadelphia was involved in the City of Nature Challenge. We came in 23rd place with over, I want to say, 13,000 observations from like 500-ish people. So the City of Nature Challenge isn't just focused on the city of Philadelphia, so it also includes the surrounding counties, which I included here. So it's Philadelphia County, which is Philadelphia, then Delaware County, Montgomery County, Bucks County, Burlington County, Camden County, and Gloucester County. So any observation that you take in any one of those counties between April 24th and 27th will go towards the City of Nature Challenge efforts. So if you have any other questions about that, you can just ask me if you have any other specific questions about our BioBlitz as well. But that is pretty much the end of our presentation. So I'm just going to open it up to another question and answer session.
Well, it looks like we have a question here. What is the difference between the BioBlitz and the City Nature Challenge?
So the BioBlitz is TTF specific. So it's an initiative that we're working on at TTF that only focuses on observations in our watershed. The City of Nature Challenge includes all 7 of those counties that I mentioned, and that's like a global BioBlitz basically.
Cool. All right, we have another comment that says, this seems like a great activity to do at home. Do you have any tips for finding awesome critters to snap pictures of?
So I think this year we're just encouraging. Last year it was more group-based, but given the coronavirus situation, we're sort of just encouraging people to go out by themselves. You can go around your house or a local park. One of the best times to see a lot of stuff is like early in the morning, which is also convenient because you won't see a lot of people either. So you might see a lot of birds in the morning and get a lot of different things active in the early morning. So you want to go in the morning at night, which is also coincidentally when there'll be less people too, but you'll have a better chance of seeing different species. And like I said too, you can sort of wander around your house or your neighborhood and still record species too. Any species is a good observation as long as it's a wild species and it's not one of those captive or cultivated. Even if you see 20 or 30 robins that have been observed on our BioBlitz page, go ahead and submit another one if you see it. It's all good data then.
Awesome. It looks like we have one last question. If folks have any other questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. We have one last one so far. It says, how do we find out who the winner of the City Nature Challenge is?
So there's a period after the City of Nature Challenge ends for like a week where they do like identifications. But I think sometime after that week, they release like the results of who won. It's a little tough to look on the app and see who won. But I think last year, like Cape Town, South Africa won or something with like 30,000 observations, which was way more observations than Philadelphia had.
Well, they're not playing around.
No.
All right, cool. So any other questions? It doesn't look like there are any in the chat box. All right, cool. Thank you so much, Ryan. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, so if we don't have any other questions, just thank you everybody for coming out tonight and learning about iNaturalist. We look forward to seeing you participate in the BioBlitz, and my contact information was on one of those initial slides, so please feel free to reach out if you have any other questions or other people that want to be involved. And a recording of this will be made available for people who didn't get a chance to see tonight as well. So thanks again, and have a good night, everybody.